All right, guys. Welcome to the Ravit Show. I have a very special guest. I've been talking since long now. It's none other than Benjamin, and he's also known as the Seattle data guy. Ben is a data scientist and engineer. He has extensive experience designing ETL pipeline, databases, websites, and other software products for startups and already established corporations. Before calling in Ben, obviously I would like to thank my golden partners, 365 Data Science and How to Get Analytics Jobs by Albert and John. They're doing fantastic stuff. Please don't forget to follow them. All right, let's have Ben here. Hey Ben, welcome to the Ravit Show. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great, Ravit. How about yourself?
I'm good. Thank you very much. We have few people joining in. We have Gaurav here. Scott Taylor is here. Hey Scott. Awesome. So we'll just wait for a few folks, but while we are waiting, Ben, why not you introduce yourself and let us know, obviously, what do you do and where you're coming from?
Yeah, no, just like a quick background on me. So yeah, I've been in, I think, the data space for somewhere in the range of 7 or 8 years. Originally started in healthcare, and then started working at like a healthcare startup after working at like a hospital. And while I was doing that, I started doing a lot of healthcare consulting, or not, sorry, not health, data consulting. So a lot of consulting for companies of all different sizes, and like I did like an insurance company, a few tech companies as well for consulting. And then I eventually moved on from that healthcare startup to start working for big tech, but continued to keep on consulting. So I think that's been something that's been a lot of fun for me. It's like seeing all the different problems that people have at different companies, and honestly, how a lot of them are similar, and how people are approaching trying to solve big data as well as data science and all the various problems that you run into as you're trying to manage data and analyze it. And so that's kind of been my background. Obviously, I think we've talked a lot about the fact that I do a lot of writing, whether it be on Medium and then a lot of also on YouTube. So yeah, I do a lot in terms of data and trying to learn more, as well as trying to share whatever I'm learning with everyone else.
Yeah, I think that's one of the best things that I've seen on internet, which is about your Medium channel, about your YouTube, your website. We'll be definitely touching base on that. And I think it's a journey that obviously you have come far. I so what I can understand is when you're coming from back then when big data was something which was booming, and till today where data is the biggest thing out there.
Yeah, no, yeah. For the start of my journey, it's funny because to me, I remember being in college and like I took an epidemiology course and I was taking like programming courses, and I was like, man, if only we could put together, epidemiology, a lot of the like the stuff you learn from a stat background and all the stuff I'm learning from programming together, and it's like. I was so focused in college, I didn't realize I think data science had just started to take off. I think that was possibly the year that whole Harvard article came out about the sexiest job being data science.
Yeah, exactly.
And all of that. And so yeah, that was kind of my start. It was I think right at either maybe not the peak, but when people started really talking about data science and things like that in general. And so that's what I think originally I was hoping to do when I started the Seattle data guy. I was like, oh, I want to do data science consulting. I think that's something that sounds cool. I've been learning a lot about it. I've got a background with a lot of programming, and I think I could apply it there. I think the funny thing is, and I think a lot of us have figured it out over the last few years, is there's so much to do before data science. So a lot of us, I think, ended up doing a lot of either data engineering work or started falling more into that bucket where either that's the stuff we like to do, or it's just we realize that there's a lot of work there. So I think that's been kind of the last few years where it's oh, there's just all this work to do before, and I really enjoy the engineering aspect of building pipelines and building data infrastructure and helping companies kind of pick the right tooling for them based on their size, their teams, and all those different points. So yeah, that's kind of how I've ended up here, from originally in college thinking about data and applying it, and then eventually thinking about trying to be more of a data science role, and then from there eventually being yeah, but I kind of like data engineering, I think, more in general anyways, so why not focus there?
Yeah. All right, that's quite a journey. And we have a few people joining in. We have Ayan, your I don't know, LinkedIn user. It's kind of private stuff that they've put in. We have Aditi here. Kate is here. Hey, Kate.
Hey, Kate.
Awesome. Yes. We have your friend Joy here.
Hey, Joy. Nice.
Yeah, so Neeraj is here. Alberto is here, Sangeeta is here. So okay, all set. I wanted to know more about the Seattle data guy. What's the story behind it? Because what I have seen is you have a Medium channel with the same name, you have a YouTube channel, you have your own consulting firm with the same name. How did this name come up, and what's the story behind this? Why Seattle data guy? And now it's a company, it's a consulting firm altogether, where you have companies whom you consult and get their data infrastructure much better. So tell us more about it, Ben.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could remember why I came up with Seattle Data Guy. I think like whenever I came up with it, I just thought it sounded catchy, right? Like it's like, it's like it just kind of rolled,
Exactly.
rolled off the tongue, and I was like, well, that works. And I was looking for some sort of name, and it worked. And I'm from Seattle, so I was there until I was like 26. So that's where I grew up, and then I maybe it's also because I like the idea of like. And some people are always like, when you're like, oh, I need an electrician, or I need like something, or I need, and like, if you've got a friend, they're like, oh, I got a guy. So I'm just like, yeah, I'll just be that. I'll be that guy for data. Like,
Wow.
if you got a data problem, it's like, oh, I got a guy. So, and it's also great for SEO. Like, at least if you're like in Seattle, like if you're looking up Seattle data consulting, I think I come up decently up there. So that's why I think most of my clients tend to be in Seattle. I do get a couple outside of Seattle, but I think that's definitely, it's like 80% in Seattle, and then the rest are kind of hit and miss. Obviously, the one thing is, we're actually kind of growing, so it's like it's not just one person anymore, and so I'm now needing to like eventually mature into an actual name that sounds like it's not just me, but I'll probably hold on to it because again, my YouTube channel, my Medium, I think from that
Exactly.
perspective, it's still good from a branding perspective.
Yeah, exactly. I think with the branding, it kind of looks very fancy to me, at least. Seattle data guy is like it's like, okay, that there's something with he's the guy who will actually work out my data very well. So it sounds good to me, at least.
Yeah.
Okay, Ben, I had another question for you. Like, how long it has been your journey into data life cycle, and tell us a little about your early days. How did you start in, how has it actually changed from back then till now? What are the things that you feel have changed in now? The consulting, the firms are actually, the companies are facing issue with those, the data that they have, and how are you solving them?
Sure. Yeah. In terms of like, just kind of looking back, obviously when I first started, even the work that I was doing, I feel like was very different. Like, I remember some of the first problems I solved was like moving a company. They had like tried to develop some sort of analytics, but they were using like Microsoft Access to try to do like on top of like 10 or 12 gigabytes of data, which obviously is not big data, but like, Access at least at the time, I don't know if it's changed, but wasn't built to do it. They had like built it all on like CSVs, and we're just using Access almost like as a query layer. It was very interesting to see, and like just moving them over to like SQL Server, and like that was kind of like one of my first projects, so that they could actually do this pretty baseline analytics. And then now seeing kind of the transformation where like everyone's going into like the cloud, because obviously people were talking about the cloud back then, but like really this push for like everyone to really try to get their data in the cloud, try to take advantage of things like BigQuery or Snowflake. It's a very different game, right? Like I feel like a lot of people have moved away from talking about maybe more classic databases, and have moved more into looking into things that can really handle big data and are built for it from the ground up, right? So I think a lot of databases were designed for transactional stuff, and analytical data warehouses have just started to hit their stride. So I think that's been a big thing. It's that I've seen. I think the other thing that I've noticed is just the change in the kind of ETL ELT game. When I first started, it was definitely a lot more like Airflow is kind of popular, but like I think it just started as well. I think a lot of the stuff I worked with was very patchworky, maybe some SSIS if anyone's familiar with that, but it was either that or like very patchwork together systems, or it was like some scripts like PowerShell, and that was almost a decade ago. You still run into that problem today, but I think a lot more companies are looking at tooling and trying to think that ingestion layer. How do we actually do it? So it's sustainable. So I think what happens is a lot of companies, when you're only having like 5 data pipelines, it's like, yeah, it's fine to kind of have these patchwork systems, but when you have 100 or 1,000, it no longer becomes feasible to maintain that entire system. So So I think that's like something else I've seen a lot of companies like trying to look at, trying to figure out how do we take advantage of all these new toolings. I think startups have kind of also obviously followed suit, where you're seeing things like Fivetran or Rivery.io or all these different
Yeah.
companies that are just trying to jump into the space, because again, it's a huge problem. Data engineers tend to be this giant bottleneck, and so people are like, okay, how do we get around this situation? Because in order to do data science, we need to get that data there, and before we didn't really think about it, but now we want to do data science. So how do we speed up this whole process? So I think that's like some of the major changes I've seen in terms of like the data product lifecycle. It's like there's just this maturing along all components of it, as people are trying to really get to I think the data science. I think people are still focused on the data science. They just realize that now there are other things prior that they need to do that they didn't really maybe think about throughout the whole process.
Yeah, I think definitely that makes sense. And also there was a question around the same thing from Gaurav. Is there any difference in the work of data scientist and data science consultant? Like, how would you differ?
Yeah, I think it can obviously depend on the project. I think in some projects, yeah, it's been about the same, where you're doing some sort of research in order to find some sort of model that's the best fit for a
Yeah.
company. And so that could be one aspect of it. I think I've also sometimes stepped in more as like a solution architect style consultant, where it's like they're looking for the best fit of tooling, right? Like, so they might already have data scientists, but they need to like pick their better tool, or they're trying to
Yeah.
pick the best tool or best solution for their whole system. So that's sometimes where I think I've stepped in as well. So I think it just ranges. I think that's what happens in terms of like the difference is like you can get asked to do a lot more things, right? Like there's probably a data scientist, you have like a limited scope depending on the company you work at, unless you're working at like a startup or somewhere where you're the only data scientist.
Yeah.
Then your scope might be a little wider, but if you're a consultant, your scope can range, right? Also, I think the other thing I always like if you're a consultant, you're probably having to do a lot more in terms of like project management and like owning kind of processes and being a little more of a communicator, and so there's some differences there, but that's just I think the nature of being a consultant and not necessarily a data science consultant.
Yeah. So it's okay. A quick question there. So do you actually? I know you were working for Facebook back then, and how would you actually identify that difference when you were working for a company which is obviously like a tech giant, and today you have your own consulting firm? Which experience do you think was is much better? Or maybe obviously I know you have now consulting firm, so you might be feeling much better about it, but still, what has been the experience back then when you were working for a tech giant, and today when you are actually solving problems for different companies and not just one company? So how does it work?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big difference here is, regardless of what, like whether it's a tech giant or, you work for just a large Fortune 500 company, I think you tend to just, like if you're a data engineer, that tends to be your role, right? Like you're not going to really be asked to go too far outside of that scope, because there are other people around you. And it's, that's something that like I always still have to learn. It's like sometimes things aren't your problem. And so you kind of have to let another team deal with an issue. And so, I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is obviously you're very focused on one area, right? Because again, you've got other people around you to do maybe analytical work or data science work. You're really focused more on just building this pipeline, and that's your role. And then, as a consultant, I think I often come in and I play a bigger role. I like to say I see end-to-end solutions. So it's like, okay, I see the raw data and I see kind of the end goal and I see kind of the process to get there. And so that means I have to build a pipeline. That means I have to do whatever form of analytics. I need to own that whole process. And so there's a lot more in terms of like taking on just different challenges, right? Like because you're the only person that you can kind of go back to. Even if I have people on my team, you're still going to need to rely on probably your understanding of the whole process, and not just again your little box that you're working on at a smaller company, or sorry, like a startup, not a startup, sorry, at like a big tech company or Fortune 500 company. So yeah, I mean, I think that's usually the major difference, right? Like it's almost like working at a startup, right? Like where it's like you could do anything any day because someone needs to do everything. That's just how it is.
And it's just not limited to something which is just your role, which is data engineering. Rather, you'll be out there doing everything, which back there in Facebook there might be teams doing it, so you get a lot more exposure. So that does make sense. And we had a similar question by Neeraj Satpal here. Benjamin, do you think a lot of data scientists don't stay in their roles for long because they have been oversold their roles? What would be your advice here?
I think it's interesting. I think that's like oddly like it's this interesting problem where I think even with like data engineers, I think we have the same problem too. Whether it's data scientists or data engineers, I think we have this vision on what we're going to be doing. For
Yeah,
example, with data engineers, it's like, oh, we're going to be like doing this like streaming data, or working on Kinesis, or like doing some sort of map reduce work or whatever it might be that we think is like this cool technical problem. And then maybe they put us on some sort of drag and drop tool like SSIS or something similar to that, or maybe they
yeah,
we're doing stuff that maybe we didn't feel like is as cool. And similar with like data science, you might be like, oh, this is more of an analyst position and it doesn't feel like data science. So I think that could be a reason, right? I think it's very hard, like it's very hard for me to imagine there being enough problems that are all like what we read about, right? Like I think, right, we read about the like 1 or 2% of problems that are very interesting that people are solving, and we don't realize that there's all this other work that goes into getting there, right? Like sometimes it is all
yeah,
those little analytical pieces of work that people do along the way to get to that final result of whatever it might be. Someone's like, oh, someone built an
yeah,
algorithm that's like whatever, saved the company $10 million or something, or whatever that end result might be. So I think some of it's oversold, sure. I think some of it's your own internal hype, right? Like I think some of it's people like, oh, this is what a data scientist is. We get to do all this, I don't know, cool
yeah,
chat work and stuff. But it just depends. And I think companies are still trying to figure out the best way to use data scientists. I think also companies still realize that they can save a lot of money or have a huge impact with basic analytics, not just super complex models. And it's also just like I think speaking of like one of the hard things, especially is like if you're just coming out of school and if you're looking to become a data scientist or if you just became one, even if you do all this research and you come up with a model, I think the hard thing usually becomes like, okay, well, what now? Like, I distinctly remember that, like, in my first, like, 2-3 years, like, I was working at a hospital, and, like, I built this model, and I was like, okay, but now what? Like, what, you just have this, like, weird, like, okay, but I don't know what the next step is, like, with this thing that I've done. And so I think there's
yeah.
just all this, like, this lack of framework that also, even if you do build something, you don't really know necessarily what to do with it. So I think there's a lot that goes around the whole, like, why data scientists
No,
leave
yeah.
concept.
No, I think definitely that makes a lot of sense, and that kind of answers very well for Neeraj. And also, just since we're talking about the early days of about engineering, and when you are a data engineer or data scientist, when you get into it, there was a question on YouTube by Daksh Kinvasra. How do you explain data engineering to a beginner?
Sure. I did like a whole video, like it's like 3 minutes, like what is a data engineer in 3 minutes? But like at the highest level, we move data from point A to point B. That's kind of like the baseline. And the goal in moving it, right? Because I often say like people should ask then like, why are we just copying data? And are you just like, what's the point? And there's a couple of different reasons I think we move it over. One often is to make that data more accessible. Oftentimes, that the data in the system, whatever it looks like, is often maybe either one, messy, two, maybe it's not modeled easily for analysts to work with, right? Like you need to add some logic to it, you need to deduplicate it. And three, just creating a layer that you can integrate with other sources of information, right? Like you might want to integrate your Workday and your Google data and your Facebook ad data and your Salesforce data, all these different systems. And so we're really focused on moving that data from all these various systems into some sort of core system that we can then do analysis on in the future. And in that comes all this modeling and cleaning up and other layers. And so I think that's kind of the goal of a data engineer, really, is to really create that core layer of data that can be used for future analytics based off of all of your company's various source systems.
Okay, that's I guess the best answer I've heard from you about data engineering, obviously. And I had what we can do is, so you were talking about a video that you had created. Was that on YouTube, Ben?
Yeah. So that was that was on YouTube. Yeah.
I think why not just give the audience a little about, show them a little about. So this is the Seattle Data Guy YouTube channel, and I see very interesting videos out here. Okay.
Yeah. So I've definitely started
Yeah,
to. I think like you probably see, I think somewhere right where that first gray thing starts it's like down one more row, is when I first started, I think, being a little more like with my face in it. Prior to that,
Yeah.
I was just kind of doing like, I was like playing around with different ideas. Like I was like, okay, what gets people, interested into data engineering, data science, and things like that. So I think that's been successful as far as like more from a YouTube side. Also, it's funny, you'll see a progression from starting against like a month ago, where that you see that first 5 mistakes new data engineers make, and you'll see me like changing the camera angle, because I think I first started out just like doing it at my kitchen counter. Like I'm literally just like on my kitchen counter, like talking to you. Then I finally bought a desk, and then some people were like the angle's weird, and so then I just kept playing around with it. So it's been kind of a fun thing, even just from more of like a YouTube kind of perspective, like playing around. And I now finally have someone that like actually edits these videos, so you'll notice that there's actually some like actual, what do you call it, like graphics and stuff involved. So it's been a fun journey. I really appreciate everyone that's followed and commented, and I look forward to doing more there.
I think definitely this is something which is fantastic, and obviously I haven't subscribed to with this ID, but I have. So if people question me that, oh, you haven't subscribed to Seattle Data Guy, that's not true. I have it subscribed. So, but I highly recommend your channel, because it has been. I have people have reached out to me, and I've given them, that okay, maybe follow this. You might get your answers, because it's very straightforward. In 3 minutes, 4 minutes, you'll be like up to the point, and it's done, and it's kind of great stuff. So Ben, keep doing what you're doing, I guess. Okay. We had one question from Alberto. Best data pipeline challenge so far?
That's man, I don't even really know. Like, I guess it's just so broad. I've run into like interesting challenges, I guess. I don't know what best really means. Like interesting challenges mean like I did like a whole migration where I like migrated a system from like from Oracle to like Microsoft, and like it was more like a funny thing that happened. Like, oh, we also like migrated to like the cloud at the same time, or not necessarily cloud, but like an off-prem server. And so what we found out is that like one of the pipelines suddenly went from like taking like a minute to like 12 hours, and we're like, well, we just moved things around. Like, why did it switch? And it's more just like a funny problem. Is like we found out that like it was literally like going to like that off-prem server now, downloading all the data onto like an on-prem computer, and then like uploading it up to the server. So that whole process, it used to be that since it was all on-prem, like it was on-prem before, it was like, oh yeah, it only took a minute because the server's right upstairs, but now it's like taking like 12 minutes. So it's more of like an interesting data pipeline like challenge, where it's just like, oh, it's such a weird thing. Like, yeah, you think like just migrating would be no problem at all, but like this weird shift in location of where things live, it has such a huge impact. So it was more like a funny challenge that I think I laugh at, just because it's like, that's a weird thing to happen. So
yeah, it's kind of time consuming too. So yeah, that's weird. But okay, so I wanted to talk a little about obviously some tricks, some tips and tricks that you can give to the audience here in terms of who want to build a career in data engineering. What could they be, Ben?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the hard things about being a data engineer, I think I talked about this on Joey's show as well. It's like there isn't necessarily a clear path, right? Like with data science, we now have like data science undergrads, which to me still blows my mind, because that was definitely not a thing. When I was in school, which it wasn't that long ago, or maybe it was, and I'm just getting old and fighting it, but I don't think it was that long ago. So yeah, like hearing that people are graduating now, so that means they've been in school for 4 years, and with undergrad in data science is interesting to me. So that's something that's interesting. But with data engineering, there isn't that clear path. So or at least like a degree that you could like get. There are certificates. That's like one option. I think the other option is often trying to find a startup or something where you can get some experience as a data engineer. Startups, I think in general, depending on how big they are, will often, I think, be a little more forgiving and more likely to, I think, as well as provide a lot more challenges. Right, like you just learn about the product and not just like the data pipeline alone, and I think that really is beneficial. So I think that's like one place that like you might have a good opportunity to start, because again, they're often looking for talent, and sometimes people are so focused on like the big 5 or 6 tech companies that exist they forget that there's all these like cool startups that like are honestly dealing with a lot of cool tech, and dealing with a lot of big data and problems as well. So one place to kind of start. If you're looking more for like education, there's plenty of like courses online, whether that's like Udemy. I always give this one Udemy course for like learning about data warehousing, which is like the basics of data warehousing. I don't remember who put it together, but it's really great just so you understand kind of what the ETL is, kind of what data warehouses are, even if things are changing and moving more into, different ways of how we store data and how we move data. I think it's good to understand kind of where we came from and, why we're trying to switch up and why people are trying to switch to ELTs, like what are the pros and cons of that. So I think that's like another place I often recommend people go, just to kind of, get that baseline of understanding. As far as like, I think the other piece of advice I give is don't be too focused on becoming like a data engineer right out of the bat, right? Like, and some people are like, oh, I got out of school and that's my goal. It's like, well, you can take some steps to get there. Like I work more in like a BI analyst role first, and then switched into data engineering.
Yeah.
And I think that's totally okay, because oftentimes you'll have to do some sort of data engineering work, or you'll have the opportunity to like take on a project that maybe gives you exposure to that, and you might not even like it. So I think it's good to like, just don't feel like that's the position you need right out of school if that's where you're starting. Just because you're likely, if you want to get there, you'll have the opportunities to learn about it, and challenge yourself to take on those projects, and then maybe in the future you can either interview or maybe move laterally inside your company to take on that data engineer position. So.
No, I think, yeah, definitely that makes sense. It's not something, I think it evolves with time. You just need to be open to, the things that are changing, because back then when data science was not a big thing, it was big data. And now somewhere big data is not even, out there. We don't even hear big data. I don't want to offend anyone with the big data thing, but obviously, I remember back 8 years back, big data was a thing and it was huge. So definitely, I think things kind of evolve, and you just need to be open with that. Also, that brings me up to an interesting question. Obviously, since you said that there are many startups that obviously they can, the beginners can actually target. And I know Cto Data Guy, being a consulting firm, is like a startup too. So, are you also hiring, Ben? And how does your company function? I know there's a website. We can definitely. I would love to show it to our folks
Sure.
who have joined in. Yeah. So, can you tell us more about what got you into consulting? And yeah, here's a website. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again. So there's a few things I guess that were there. As far as like hiring goes, I think we did some. I hired someone recently, and that was kind of really beneficial. I think data engineering has been kind of very busy recently, and so trying to take all that on, as well as like manage like content creation. There's just a lot. There's just a lot to do. For me and in general, I think. What was I thinking as well? As far as kind of how I got into consulting again, like it was honestly just someone asked for help forever ago, a long time ago, and when I first, I think like my first year out, and it wasn't that complicated, but it was like interesting to take on this problem and help out this another company through basically what was data engineering, and learn about like that process, learn about like one, improving your communication and all these different kind of steps, and learning how much you'll actually have to like really challenge yourself when you're consulting, because you're having to do so much more self-reliance. You're not there's no boss to be like, yes, you're doing the right work, or no, you're not. And so
exactly.
I think it was like an interesting journey as far as like how I got started and going forward with that.
Yeah, sounds good. So this is your website, Ben, and what I see is definitely there's a lot that you actually offer as well. I can see cloud and data infrastructure consulting, data engineering, and automation. So how big of a team is Cto Data Guy?
Yeah, we're currently in the range of like I think it's like 3 or 4 people. Sorry, I think it's about 3 people. There's another person that works for me full time, as well as someone that I bring on for more contracting work. And so that's kind of our team. As well as now again, there's also like a partial editor, but that's more for YouTube, and so I still kind of consider him part of the CL Data Guy team in a way, because it's like they're still helping us brand and kind of improve the whole process. So yeah, no, it's kind of a slowly growing team, and I think it's really picked up just with this year. Again, data engineering work in general, I think it's just kind of tended to explode over the last little bit, and so that's kind of, I think, encouraged me to kind of try to grow even faster. So
Yeah. So, are you guys also planning a newsletter or something, or do you guys already have a newsletter?
Yeah, I
Where
mean,
people
we
can
currently do
actually sign
manage
up.
like a Substack. I think that's the one of the places people are working at. Again, same name, Seattle Data Guy. I think it's like SeattleDataGuy.substack or something.
Okay,
Oh
that's
no, yeah,
fantastic.
SeattleDataGuy.substack.com. That's kind of where we're managing a newsletter. The goal of that is to kind of give a combination of things. Like one, I think there's a lot of noise in the tech space, so I'm trying to just give you an understanding of like what's changing, what are some of the cool companies that are coming out, what they're
Exactly.
doing, what they're trying to take on. So I've got like different sections, like the Cto Synopsis, which is again, it's just focused on like, okay, what's happening and what's interesting and worth knowing about this week. I also do like some office hours that I'll like open up that I'll include on that. So if someone wants to maybe talk about data for 15, 20 minutes, I can
Wow.
kind of jump on.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's generally that. And then again, some other companies that I would be interested in, like some startups. What's the one I mentioned recently? I'm like scrolling through.
Yep.
Show post. Oh, like I was looking at like ChargeBee, I think in one, and PayHawk, and a couple other in like the fintech space, because I think that's been like an interesting area. Although that's less about data, I think it's just interesting seeing fintech kind of come up some more. Especially after the whole Robinhood and things like that. It's interesting seeing other
Wow.
areas besides just stock trading and seeing the other ways people are trying to like improve kind of the whole financial process in general. So that was something I thought was interesting.
No, I think that sounds interesting. What I can do is definitely after a call and after the whole session, I can put that link of Substack where people can actually sign up for your newsletter
Yeah.
and can just be up to date about what you guys are sharing, because I think tech news is something which people love to see right now, and if there's something which is coming from a data engineer, why not? So I'll share that with the audience, definitely. Okay, I'll just pick a few more questions from the audience. There's another question from Neeraj. Can you please share your take on key traits of successful data science managers?
Sure. Okay. Let me think about that one. I think it's like the hard thing there. It's like, we're just starting to get to, I think, a place where a lot of people are getting experienced enough to be data science managers. So it's always interesting seeing the different ways people take that problem on. I think you've got the kind of, you've got the way, like the key traits I've often seen is like one, being able to kind of explain to upper management, like
Yeah.
just how long, either how long it takes or making sure you set expectations correctly. Because I think data science is this weird space, especially in terms of like finishing work, where it's kind of ambiguous sometimes. Like, right, like it can be like, we did this work, we did this analysis, and nothing came up, or maybe we're still doing more analysis or something like that. And so figuring out how to actually like set expectations with upper levels, just so that they're not, they're knowing what to expect, and they're knowing that sometimes it's okay if like nothing came from that analysis. Like if you were able to figure out something from every analysis that you did, where in theory you could save the company 10% or hundreds of millions of dollars, like then every company out there would be operating at zero cost. But that's not the way it goes, right? Like most analysis probably brings up nothing, or only brings you to another future analysis that you've got new questions now. So I think that's an aspect of it. I think another aspect is helping more junior data scientists kind of understand like a process. I think that was something else that like when I first started working in data science, or like trying to take on data science problems, I didn't really have a process. You kind of like, you have all these techniques and all these tools, but you don't really know how to apply them, right? Like in software, we have a pretty clear like way of how we like approach problems. You take on whether it's Scrum or Agile or whatever, right? Like we have kind of a clear way to get from point A to point B. And I think for a while there, especially when I first started, like it wasn't as clear. So when I like in my best experiences, like when I had a manager, especially whether it's analytics or data science, that was able to help me like understand a process. Like, okay, step one, write down the questions you're going to try to answer. Don't go crazy. Don't try to analyze too much. really focus in on whatever 3 or 4 questions, and then step 2, like do XYZ, like start storing up, start like breaking down the problem, and then start putting together charts and different points that help support your question, and then write some sort of like concise conclusion. So I think that's helpful. It's like having someone that actually like sets those boundaries, because again, I think as a data scientist we have all these tools, but we don't necessarily know where to apply them if no one kind of tells us right away, like especially if you're just out of school. And so I think that's somewhere else where a data science manager can kind of come in. It's like helping people understand what those boundaries are, where the process is, what it is, and what it should look like. So yeah, I think that's at least some key traits I think in terms of like successful data science managers.
Yeah, I think definitely that is very interesting. And also, I had a question for you, Ben. As a data engineer, what are your favorite problems that you love to solve for your companies or for your clients?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like generally maybe a little less of a problem and more of just like a state. Like I really like, I think most engineers like coming into a greenfield situation, right? Like we love coming into like situations where companies are just starting their data journey. We can kind of help set up the whole infrastructure, help them pick the right tooling for them. Yeah, it's kind of a problem, but it's also kind of like, because you're dealing with more like people aspects, like you're trying to figure out, okay, what's their team look like, what's like their future maintenance going to look like, if I pick one tool over another, what will work better for them, do they have cost restraints and all these other kind of components besides just the technical aspect.
Yeah,
I think the technical aspect is fun, but after a certain point, you kind of hit a ceiling where it's like you have enough knowledge to solve most technical problems, and then the harder problems tend to be more on like the business side and like coordinating and moving all these other pieces around. So I think that tends to be very interesting. So trying to think big picture, and then apply the details later. I think that's generally where I like to plan.
yeah, I think that does make sense. There's a question from LinkedIn user, very interesting question. What are your thoughts on federated networks? It's also given, yeah.
Can he give me federated?
So there's federated is a group of interconnected digital business networks with.
Oh yeah. That's always, I think, if I'm understanding this correctly,
Yeah,
we're talking about most likely companies that maybe share like data across different
data, I
resources.
guess. Yes.
I think that's always that's like an interesting thing. Like a lot of companies do that, where they sell it anyways, right? Like a lot of companies, like Visa and like Mastercard, they sell your data. Like when I worked at a hospital, like you could buy credit card data from these like. It's always funny
Okay.
to me. It's like one of the weirdest things. Where like we're buying credit card data to do analysis on people. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And for that, it was more of like a POC, but it's just one of those things where it's like I think federated networks is I think interesting because I think you just share the data. You have like some sort of like agreement where it's like we just share this kind of data. Yeah, it's always kind of on the edge. Like I think it's hard to like give like a good answer and feel safe there, right? Like some people might be like, oh, you're anti or pro. Like I think like in my perspective, if it benefits people, there's in theory nothing wrong with it. The problem is how much is it benefiting people versus purely benefiting companies. And so it's like I think that's always going to be the edge where it's like there's so much good you could in theory do with it, right? Like there's actually a lot of good like that you could maybe do from a healthcare perspective, if you would be able to like share data more freely and like but there's so much bad that can happen there. Like that's the flip side. So that's why it's like for me, it's like if everyone was good and had good intentions, like it would be amazing. The problem is we have people with bad intentions, or people who have purely monetary motivations, and so it's like I don't know. I really wish we could do everything in this perfect world where you're really caring about everyone else. So because then I would love it. Then I would love it. But I think the problem is we don't live in that world, so it's harder to say. It's gray for me.
Right. No, I think definitely. It's something It's like a question which is kind of weird. Where obviously it's about selling the data, or buying the data. It's like sorry, but obviously companies are doing it, and it can be done for good if used in healthcare sector. So yes, definitely it does make sense. Ben. Also, I had one interesting question. Since I know you are having many clients, and you kind of literally solve problems for them. So what is the most common problems that you have seen that the companies are facing today in setting up a data strategy or their data infrastructure? what are these common problems, and how do you actually solve them?
Yeah, I think one of the common problems is, companies again are still just kind of switching over, I think, to thinking of data engineering outside of just maybe more like patchwork systems, or thinking about it more as like a trying to figure out how to like centralize a lot of that work. I think,
Yeah.
when I worked at a lot of other companies, you'd see that they'd have like little teams that kind of did data engineering or data architecture work, and maybe they didn't have like consistent pipelines throughout. And I think a lot of companies are trying to switch and develop some sort of central system. So I think that's one interesting problem that I see companies still trying to solve is, how do we really improve our whole flow of data? I think there's still a lot of work there. I think that's something that I talk to a lot of people. It's like there's a lot of data engineering work coming up, because it's like a lot of companies are dealing with tech debt, where they have pipelines that were really patchwork together. Again, a combination of like PowerShell and Python, and it's running on some sort of cron job, and they're just guessing like based on every few hours, like, okay, this task should finish, so set the next one. And so that's still like a very common problem that I'll come into and need to fix. I think another common problem is like knowing what to do, right? Like I think every company, like regardless of the size, like we're talking about companies that range from like 1 million to 9, 10 figures, like they often don't always know what they want to do with the data. Like they have a lot of data, but they're not necessarily certain. And so playing a role there as well, where you try to help companies define what they could do with the data, where their biggest like opportunities are. I think that's one big thing, is like helping them focus in, because there's just so much data. I like to say big data is as much of a positive as it is a negative, right? Like we have all of these options as far as like what we can pull in. It's so big that it can be expensive to store, and so making sure you actually pick the data that's most useful for you at the right moment, rather than like trying to pull it all in at once. Be like, oh well, we're going to need data from all these different angles. It's like, well, you don't even have the team members on the business side to like act on the strategy that you're going to develop based off this data. So really focus on aligning that goal with the data, because then you'll know what data to pull, you'll know then what to work on, and it's just this whole process where it's like, okay, yeah, the business problem you're trying to solve, and it's a little clearer. So I think that those are some of the key areas I still see companies working with, and really I think taking on seriously. I think the thing that's like beneficial, like I think a lot of companies are looking at it and trying to take this on seriously. Like they're like, all right, we actually need to solve this. Data is not just like an IT thing where we're like, okay, it's a cost that we have to pay for. We don't necessarily like that. Now I think it's like, okay, this is a benefit that if we do right, really help us.
Yeah, I think that is definitely the approach for prioritizing your data for the companies, and making sure that the right data is being moved and worked on. So I think it does really make a lot of sense there. When also, since we're talking about the company challenges and all of those things, I had obviously a question around data engineers. So what are the three challenges that you feel as a data engineer out there, that okay, these are the three challenges I face every day, or maybe in the start of your career you have faced those three challenges and how you've overcome them?
Yeah, I mean, I think like we're looking at the beginning of my career, like talking about challenges. I think there was a lot of best practices I didn't know. I like to tell people, like I spent the first 6 months out of college not realizing I was looking at a data warehouse, or like realizing that I was looking at something different than like essentially a transactional database, right? Like no one explained that to me. No one was like, oh, this is the differences. This is why we build it the way it is. It's like, okay, it's still kind of in a database format. So you see the keys. You're like, okay, I can join this. It's still like a database. And it takes a while to be like, oh, I've been working on something that's not even the same. And so like having those like understanding those like best practices, as well as like having that onboarding process where someone can help you understand, I think is beneficial. I think some people maybe they don't understand that, like, yeah, they don't teach you data warehousing in college. Like that's like, and some people might get it, some people might not, and like taking the time to actually teach people not just best practices, but kind of to understand how data works in the professional setting, I think is one interesting challenge, which led then I think to the next challenge, which was learning how to build like maintainable systems. You have all of these tools, I think, at your disposal coming out of college, like, oh, I can program, I can do this, I can do that, and you have no idea how to actually apply them, right? So you just end up building things based off what makes sense in your brain. And there are books you can read on like good design and things like that, but I think at the end of the day, having someone that can kind of help you out there and give you insight is helpful. If you're trying, another great solution for that problem is also like, looking through well-developed code bases. I think that's always like one way I've learned. That's always like the thing I tell people. It's like the first time you realize you write bad code is when you look at real, like actual good code. It's like, oh yeah, I don't know what I've been writing for the last year. So it's always
Right.
interesting seeing someone's code where you like read it and you understand it right away, and you're like, oh, that's good code. So I think that's
Okay.
another challenge. I think just in day-to-day work, like when you look at data engineers, we're just struggling in terms of like there's just so much data, and you're often balancing like pulling in new data sources, maintenance work of like failing pipelines because an API changes or because a column was added or something like that, as well as like having to add columns, and like it's all these different types of work that you need to take on, and oftentimes depending on the company you work at, the data engineering team might not be that big, and so really trying to find even the balance there, which is, how do we get all this work done so that all these data scientists who are trying to impact the company can do their work. So it's an interesting balance there.
Yeah, I think definitely that is interesting. Okay, we had a follow-up question actually from George. What should one learn to tackle first, according to you?
Hmm. That's a very broad question, George. You mean in data? What like what skills should someone learn first? What should someone?
Okay, yeah. Let's say if it's about the skill set, what do you say? Which one should be the thing?
Yeah, I mean, like if you're learning, if you want to become a data engineer, or even like I imagine even similarly a data scientist, like I often tell people it's like learn coding in SQL first, right? Like as a foundation, because that will often open up the doors onto where you can go from there, right? Because often you'll
Okay,
learn, Python, SQL, R, whatever you prefer first, and then you'll start looking and be like, oh, what's data warehousing? What are these other concepts on top of the
exactly.
system? Oh, how do I, now work with the cloud? And you can obviously layer these things, but I think it all kind of starts with, learning like basic Python, some SQL, some command line, especially now that like personally, it's so easy to set up some skill set. Okay, thanks, George.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, yeah, basically, like I said, like learning like Python, SQL, some command line, I think is a great place to start because that's going to kind of help you like build that foundation for the next layer. Which again, if you want to do more data science work, you can start going down that route, learning more about machine learning, statistics, things like that. If you want to do more data engineering, you can now go focus more on data warehousing, ETLs. If you want to become a programmer, now you can go focus more on like object-oriented programming, data structures and algorithms. Yeah, and
Mm,
obviously some people with data engineers, you do some data structures and algorithms as well. But like there's just like different waves, and because even from there, it's like if you want to be a front end developer, you've got a whole different set of tools, and so building that base is where you start, and then from there you kind of build more of like the best practices from all these different different disciplines. So yeah, I think that's where it starts personally.
yeah, I think that was a nice question. It kind of brought many things in broad ways. Thanks, George. And very nice explanation, Ben. Definitely. Okay. That was a lot about obviously data engineering and things. But now I want to actually ask you a few light questions, obviously around. I heard you spoke about reading books. So definitely, I wanted to know some of your favorite books
Hello.
and that you would want to recommend, which you use in your daily work or anything.
Yeah, so I mean, I think one book, like just to start out with for most people, would be something like what do you call it? It's like Kimball's. Let me find it. It's Kimball's The Data Warehouse Toolkit. It's kind of an older book. It's definitely a dry book and it's big, but I think it's interesting to see like where data warehousing kind of started and kind of why people try to solve this problem, and to see how old this concept is, because I think that's always interesting to me. It's like it's something that's stuck with us for so long, and only now with like the advent of cloud are things kind of trying to change. But up until now, I feel like that's been a foundation for a lot of people in terms of like building out things. I think the other book that I generally liked was like Python for Data Analysis by what's his name, Wes McKinney. Um, yeah, I think that's like a classic book personally that I've read, especially when I was trying to learn more about like analysis and learning more with pandas and doing that kind of work. I think I still end up leaning more towards SQL when I do analysis, but I know for like data scientists, I always talk to them, and they're always doing like joins and merges on the Python side, which I always find like wild. I'm like, oh, I just did it in SQL. You're over here, trying to join data frames. So it's a very interesting kind of thing. So it was good to learn and understand, especially from data scientist perspective, like how they look at data, and I feel like it's slightly different. So I think that's like an interesting
Yeah,
and a classic book as well. So I think those are two
yeah, it
books
does
I
make
enjoy.
sense. Awesome recommendations. I'll put it for the audience, obviously, after the call. Okay, so that brings me to another important question. I know there's a Medium page that you have, which has like almost 23,000 subscribers, and I've been avid reader there. I would love to actually show it to the people where they can actually follow you.
Sure.
So I had a question around that. When did you actually start this? Writing on Medium, and I know it's kind of difficult to choose a favorite one, but still, which so this is the page, and yeah, tell us more about this Medium page because it's like 23K followers. And when did this start? And what all do you share here? Everything about it, please.
Yeah, I mean, so it started somewhere in like 2017. I was helping a friend out. They were trying to build like a company that was involved in like social media marketing and doing analytics around that. And so I was learning a lot about like content marketing and things of that nature. And I had started my company, so I was kind of writing some blogs at that point. But obviously having a hard time getting traffic to that blog. And
Yeah.
so one thing I learned about was Medium, which especially back then in 2017, like Medium was popular, like not necessarily popular, but like a lot of people wrote on it, but not that many people wrote on it.
Yeah.
And so like if you wrote an article on there, even if it wasn't great, you'd instantly get like 600 views or 1,000 views, and you'd be like, what? I just got 1,000
Wow.
views. So I think that's where it kind of started. Um, Oh, sorry. So another fun thing about Medium is just like YouTube in the terms of, or I think they say they're not like this, but I think YouTube says the same thing. They're like,
Yeah.
oh, it doesn't matter if you put us behind a paywall or if you put ads on our show. We'll share you just the same. But it's like you do you're like, I don't think you do. So to improve share,
Yeah.
you do tend to have to put everything behind a paywall. But you can find, I think most of these articles on the Seattle Data Guide too. Like I share them in both places, so if you want to see them for free,
Okay.
just easily click there. But yeah, so that's kind of how I started writing. I just started writing with that perspective in mind, like trying to solve a lot of problems, or trying to write about problems that I was solving anyways. I think the other thing, as far as like favorite articles, I think one was more of like a humor article where I wrote like the 7 habits of effective programmers. And it was completely satire. My favorite line, I think, was something like, "Everyone else writes terrible code, but you." Like that was supposed to be like the key point where like people were like, "Okay, guys, this is a joke." Clearly, some people did not take it as a joke. Some people took it as like serious. They're like, "This is terrible advice." It's like, yes, I know it's the joke. But it definitely got a lot of traction. It was fun to write because it's just, you're writing this out of complete jazz. It was kind of written, I don't know if you've ever watched like The Tech Lead. It was like written in his kind of like voice where he's like always super dry, but like you're always on the edge. Like, is he giving me good advice or is he like trolling me?
Yeah.
It's so hard to tell. So that was kind of the idea. But that's more on the humor side. More on like just like the helpful side. I put together like guides, and they're not like, there's nothing I think too brilliant about them. They're just some guides that help you kind of consolidate what you're studying, whether it's data science, software, or data engineering for interviews.
Yeah.
And they're really just Google Sheets, but I posted them also here on Medium, and they've done well. So I think people are using them. They're just like basically sectioned off questions where it's like, okay, this is some SQL questions you can go find, whether it's on HackerRank or LeetCode, and then here's some videos on SQL, and then here's some secondary questions you can look at SQL after watching those videos and doing those first questions. So it's just consolidated down so that hopefully people can have that benefit of not having like there's just so much noise when it comes to interviewing and like tips for interviewing that I think like even when I was interviewing, it was just helpful to like consolidate everything I was doing and be like, okay, this is the stuff I'm going to study. These are the videos I'm going to watch. Don't focus too much on everything else. So I think that was the idea. I think what's interesting now is like I think in the last year or two, you've seen the advent and like popularization of like interview websites, right? Like there's so many sites that you can go on now that will like for like $15 a month, you can get like access to questions and helpful tips. So it's interesting. Like before, it used to just be like HackerRank and LeetCode, and now people are basically taking like HackerRank, LeetCode problems and like creating subscription services. So it's interesting seeing the changes in that way. But yeah, I think those are my 2 favorite articles.
Yeah, I think This is amazing and great experience. Thanks for sharing that, Ben. Definitely, Medium is a place where we can learn so much. And your articles are like I said, they're just like your videos. They are very up to you. It's just straightforward, and obviously you have that humor, which if one gets into that humor and understands it well, they'll enjoy each and every article. And there's a lot to learn, obviously. So it kind of brings in very well. So thanks for that. Okay, before we wrap this up, I had a question for which I usually have for all my guests. So, which are your favorite podcasts you recommend to people they should watch and they can get some insights? Uh, which are those, Ben?
Yeah, I think when I first started out, especially like more with like the data science kind of goals, I
Yeah.
was listening a lot to was it Super Data Science podcast. I don't know, you probably
Yeah.
it's classic. I think I used to see his
Yeah.
posts a lot more on LinkedIn. I feel like I haven't seen them in a while, but that used to be a big one, especially when I first started out. I think it's great for people in that 1 to 3 year range of experience. You learn a lot about
Wow.
people's careers and things like that.
Yeah.
I still kind of occasionally listen to the Data Skeptic when I needing
Oh,
to.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's another great podcast. And then of course like the data engineering podcast. I mean, it's kind of like with that kind of a name, you have to listen to it occasionally, especially as a data engineer, and just hearing about other people's experiencing in data engineers and
Yeah.
people are trying to solve various kind of like
Yeah.
issues and things like that. So yeah, those are kind of my
Yeah,
favorites.
great recommendations. I still listen to SDS. I know it was first obviously hosted by Kirill and Manko. Now it's been now John Crown obviously hosts the SDS, and I kind of enjoy each of those experiences of people coming there and having weekly sessions that they have. So yeah, it's fun. Thanks for those recommendations. Also, last but not the least, I wanted to let the audience know where if they feel like reaching out to you, if they want to actually meet you and discuss about opportunities together, right? For your is there a chance that you let guest bloggers also post on your Medium channel? Can they do that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely occasionally have people guest blog, or even like sometimes I'll do like roundups where I think right now I'm doing one where it's like I'm asking a few experts to like give me an opinion on like where they see data going in the next year. So I do try to like give those opportunities if it makes sense. It's always kind of a balance, like if it's a product or something, or if because obviously I want to help benefit them, but obviously I don't want to make it sound too salesy. So I think that's always like the cross benefit.
No, yeah, definitely.
It's like I want to make sure people are getting advice, which I think most people do. Even like a lot of startups these days, like are almost people are usually people that like have been in the industry for a while and have a decent solution that they're trying to solve some sort of consistent problem that we're having in the data sphere. So I think even that tends to be interesting as far as like what they're trying to do. So as long as it's a good fit, I'm usually pretty open to that, or maybe having a guest blog on like the SeattleDataGuy.com or something.
Yeah, I think definitely that is super. So, for the audience, where can they reach out to you, and which is the best place to have a chat with you, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, you can probably either find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, as the Seattle Data Guy, or I come up pretty much right away with my name, Ben Rogojan.
Mhm.
I think there's maybe one other Ben Rogojan that I've ever found in the world. So,
Yeah.
so I come up pretty quickly. You can also just email me at what's it, b.rogojan at the
Awesome.
SeattleDataGuy.com, or you can just go to my site and go to contact, and that'll also work. But yeah, there's pretty much anything connected to the Seattle Data Guy for now, at least as I know of, should be me. Hopefully that remains that way, but for now, you can pretty much find me on most social sites. So,
Yeah, definitely. But fun talking to you, Ben. It was a pleasure to have you and discuss about data engineering. Obviously, I'm looking. We can talk for another hour, but I'll keep it for 2.0.
sure.
And looking forward to that one. And there'll be more to talk. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. Thanks, Ben,
Thank you.
for sharing the experience. Take care. Have a nice day.
Yep, you too. Bye.